Your jaw hurts. It has been hurting since sunrise. You are crouched by a slow river, somewhere around 2 million years ago. The grass is wet, the light is thin and gray, and in your hands is a strip of raw antelope, tough as a leather belt. You bite, you tear, you chew, and you chew, and you chew. Not for a minute, not for 10, for hours. Today you eat in about 1 hour, spread across a day. Maybe less, if lunch is a sad sandwich at a desk. Back then, eating was not a break in the day. Eating was the day. So here is the question almost nobody asks. Before cooking existed, before a single flame ever touched a single meal, what did ancient humans actually do with all that time? The answer is stranger than it sounds, and it begins inside the mouth. Think about the shape of a normal modern morning. An alarm, a shower, coffee, a screen. Somewhere in there, food gets shoved into a 5-minute gap. Nobody schedules their whole life around chewing. Nobody has to. Now strip all of that away. No stove, no pot, no pan, no fire at all. What is left is a body that has to earn every single calorie the slow way, with its teeth. And raw food does not give up its energy easily. It resists, it fights back, it takes time. You already know this in miniature. Try eating a raw potato, or a fistful of dry, uncooked grain. Your jaw gives out long before your hunger does. Now imagine that being the only option for your entire life, with no exceptions and no shortcuts. That is not an occasional bad meal. That is every meal forever, and that time had to come from somewhere. So where did it go? Start with a living answer. Chimpanzees are close cousins, and they still eat the old way, raw, unprocessed, straight off the branch. Watch one for a day and something jumps out fast. A wild chimpanzee spends around 6 hours a day chewing. 6. That is not a snack. That is a full-time job with no weekends. Their teeth are bigger than yours. Their jaws are stronger. Their guts are longer, built to grind through fibrous raw material for hours. And still, it costs them half their waking life. And chewing was only the last step. Before a single bite, the food had to be found. That meant walking, climbing, reaching into thorns and stripping bark. It meant hours of searching, often for a low, disappointing reward. Raw plants are bulky and thin on calories. You have to eat a mountain of them to break even. There was also no fridge, no pantry, no leftovers waiting for tomorrow. Whatever you gathered, you ate, or it rotted. Every sunrise reset the whole problem back to zero. The hunt for calories never actually ended. It just paused for sleep, then started again. And all of this happened out in the open, where you were also on the menu. Bending to dig up a root meant taking your eyes off the tree line. Every meal carried a quiet tax of risk. So the day was not just long. It was tense, and it never really let up. Now picture an early human with a body much closer to yours. Smaller mouth. Weaker bite. Same brutal menu of raw meat and raw roots. The math gets ugly quickly. Here is where a hard number makes it real. In 2011, Chris Organ and Richard Wrangham, working at Harvard University, published a study in the journal PNAS. They mapped feeding time across primates and asked a simple thing. How long should a primate of human size spend eating each day? The prediction was staggering. About 48% of the day, roughly half of every waking hour, gone, just to feed the machine. And how much do modern humans actually spend? Around 7%, under an hour. Sit with that gap for a second. Half your day versus 1 hour. Something reached in and stole back nearly 5 hours of daily life. That something is the whole story. So what happened? What emptied out the calendar? The obvious answer is fire. And fire is a huge part of it. But here is where most people get the timeline badly wrong. Everyone assumes it went like a cartoon. A caveman rubs 2 sticks together, discovers fire, and roasts a mammoth leg that same night. One light bulb moment. Problem solved. The truth is far slower and far weirder. Controlling fire and cooking with it every single day are 2 completely different skills, and they may be separated by hundreds of thousands of years. Learning to keep a flame alive is one thing. Reorganizing your entire biology around the meals it makes is another, and the physical evidence for that shift comes out of the ground in pieces. But it does not start with fire at all. It starts with a rock. Go to a place called Gona in Ethiopia. In the 1990s, Seleshi Sama and colleagues published work in the journal Nature on stone tools found there. The date was almost hard to believe, around 2. 6 million years old, the oldest sharp tools we know of. These were not weapons. They were kitchen knives in the deepest sense. Simple flakes chipped off a stone, sharp enough to slice meat off a bone and scrape flesh from hide. Think about what that flake really was. It was a way to eat without paying the full price in teeth. Before anyone tamed a flame, our ancestors were already hacking food into softer, smaller pieces, already stealing time back from the jaw, one crude blade at a time. So the effort to escape the 6-hour chew is old. Older than fire. Older than our own species. And it comes in layers. Go to Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. In 2012, a team led by Francesco Berna published findings in Nas from deep inside that cave. They found ashed plant remains and burned bone fragments about 1 million years old, sitting well back from the entrance where lightning could not reach. That last detail matters. Fire that starts by accident stays near the mouth of a cave. Fire found 1 million years deep, far from the opening, points to something else. Someone carried it in. Someone kept it going. But keeping a fire is not proof of a kitchen. So the search moves forward in time, looking for the moment fire stops being a rare guest and becomes a habit. Here is where it gets sharper. Travel to a site in Israel called Gesher Beno Yaakov. In 2004, Naama Goren Inbar published work in the journal Science describing burned wood, seeds, and flint scattered across that ancient lakeshore. The age? Around 790,000 years old. The burned flint clustered in tight patches, not random smears. That clustering hints at a repeated spot, a place people came back to, the faint outline of a hearth drawn in ash 750,000 years before you were born. Still, patches are not proof of routine. The clearest hearth comes later, and it is almost boringly familiar. At Kesem Cave, also in Israel, Ruth Shahak Gross and colleagues published a study in 2014 in the Journal of Archaeological Science. They found a central hearth, roughly 300,000 years old, used over and over in the same spot. Layers of ash stacked on ash, burned bone all around it. That is not a lucky lightning strike. That is a habit. That is people returning, night after night, to the same warm circle to eat. That is, in the most literal sense, the first living room. So the picture sharpens. Fire arrives slowly. Cooking arrives even slower. And every step of that long grinding process was buying back the same precious thing. Time, now stop for a second and go back to that riverbank. Feel the ache in the jaw again. Feel the cold and the tough meat and the light that has barely changed since you started eating. Hold that in mind. Because the next piece is the one that flips the whole story. The moment we stop asking how ancient humans survived the long meal and start asking what they got when the meal finally got short. But why would fire buy back so much of it? What does heat actually do to a meal that a strong jaw cannot? Here is the part that quietly rewrites everything. There is a popular idea, still floating around wellness culture, that raw food is the most natural and therefore the most nourishing way to eat. Purely, calorie for calorie, that is not true, and the proof comes from careful lab work. Rachel Carmody, working with Richard Wrangham, ran experiments feeding animals identical food either raw or cooked. Same ingredients, same weight. The only difference was heat. The results were clear. In work published in Nas in 2011, mice fed cooked meat and cooked sweet potato gained more body weight than mice fed the very same food raw. Not because they ate more, because they got more out of each bite. The animals on cooked food consistently extracted more usable energy from the exact same meal. Heat, in other words, is worth calories. A cooked dinner is a bigger dinner, without adding a single crumb. Cooking, it turns out, is a kind of predigestion done outside the body. Heat unravels tough protein. It bursts open stubborn starch. It kills some of what would otherwise make you sick. A cooked meal essentially hands your gut a head start. That is the trick. Fire does the grinding your teeth used to do. It does the breaking down your stomach used to strain for. Every hour the flame works is an hour your jaw does not have to. And that brings us back to the aching mouth from the very start of all this. Because if the day was built around chewing, then removing the chewing does not just save time. It removes the entire center of gravity of ordinary life. Think about what actually filled those long raw hours. Not just eating, preparing to eat, searching for food, carrying it, fighting to break it down, and doing it all again, dawn to dusk. Because a raw body is a leaky engine that never quite fills up. There was no lunch break, because there was no work to break from. The eating was the work. Your ancestors' to-do list had one item on it, in bold, all day, every day. Get enough calories to be alive tomorrow. Whatever scraps of time were left went to the things a body still demands. Grooming, guarding children, repairing a tool, keeping the peace inside a small, tired group that could not afford a single wasted mouth, and the toll of it showed in the skeleton. Teeth wore down to flat, cracked stumps from years of grinding raw fiber and grit. Jaws stayed heavy and powerful because they had to. The whole face was, in a sense, a tool worn out by a lifetime of one endless meal. That is the life the flames slowly dismantled. Not with a single dramatic invention, but by chipping away, hour by hour, at the tyranny of the chew. And even the tools tell that story. Long before fire became routine, humans found other ways to cheat the jaw. In 2016, Catherine Zink and Daniel Lieberman, again at Harvard University, published a study in the journal Nature. They tested what happens when you simply process food before eating it, slicing meat thin with a stone flake, pounding roots to a pulp. The results were dramatic. A diet built around sliced meat and pounded vegetables cut the total chewing down by roughly 2 million chews a year. 2 million. And it took far less force in every single bite. Read that as a time budget, not a biology paper, and it lands harder. A sharp stone was a clock. Every slice shaved minutes off the meal. Every pound of a root gave back a slice of the afternoon. So the deep answer to what did they do all day starts to invert. For most of human history, the honest answer is grim and simple. They processed food and they ate it, and that was nearly the whole day. The rest of life had to squeeze into the cracks. Which raises the real question underneath the fun one. If eating swallowed the day, then what did cooking actually give beyond a warm dinner? It gave the cracks room to grow. Consider what shows up in the record once cooking becomes normal. In 2011, Amanda Henry and colleagues published a study in NOS examining hardened plaque on the teeth of ancient humans and Neanderthals. Trapped inside that plaque were tiny grains of starch, and some carried the telltale signs of having been cooked before they were eaten. Some of those teeth came from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, and from a site called Spy in Belgium, thousands of miles apart. Tens of thousands of years old. The plaque held date palm, grass seeds, and other plants, some of them clearly softened by heat before they were swallowed. Even Neanderthals, so often cast as brutish, were seasoning and softening their food. The plants in their teeth had been heated. Prepared? Chosen? That is not a survival reflex. That is something closer to a recipe. And a recipe is a small miracle, because it means somebody had time to think about the meal instead of just surviving it. Here is the theory that ties the whole thing together, and it comes straight from Richard Wrangham's 2009 book Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human. His argument is bold and hard to shake. Cooking did not just feed the human body. Cooking rebuilt it, and then rebuilt the day around it. And there is a suspicious fingerprint in the fossil record. Around 9 million years ago, a new human ancestor appears, Homo erectus, with a striking new body plan. The teeth shrink, the jaw gets lighter, the rib cage narrows, hinting at a smaller gut, and the brain begins its long climb upward. Small teeth are a strange thing to evolve if you still spend 6 hours a day chewing raw fiber. Wrangham's reading is direct. Those shrinking teeth are a clue that the food was already getting softer. Something outside the body was doing the hard work first. Softer, higher energy food meant the gut could shrink. There was no more need for that vast, hungry, chimp-like digestive tract grinding away for hours, and a shrinking gut freed up a huge amount of energy. There is even a name for this trade. In 1995, Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler laid it out in the journal Current Anthropology. They called it the expensive tissue hypothesis. Guts and brains are both metabolically costly. Spend less fuel running a long gut, and you free up fuel to run a bigger brain. So the flame did something almost poetic. It took energy out of the stomach and quietly moved it upstairs, into the skull. Fire fed the belly less, and the brain more, and a bigger brain, freshly fed, sitting in a body that suddenly has hours of empty afternoon it never had before. That is a genuinely new kind of creature. That is an animal with spare time. It is worth saying plainly how much time we are talking about. Remember the numbers. Nearly half the day predicted for a primate our size. Under an hour for us. That is a swing of 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours every single day handed back to the species. Multiply that across a lifetime. Across generations, across a whole species over hundreds of thousands of years. That is not a minor upgrade. That is an ocean of reclaimed time, poured into a brand new animal that finally had a moment to look up. And fire did not only shorten the day, it also lengthened it. Before controlled flame, darkness ended everything. When the light died, you were blind, cold, and prey. The day simply switched off. Fire changed that too. It pushed the dark back a few feet and held it there. And in that small circle of light, a brand new slice of time appeared. The evening. There is a striking window into what that evening became. In 2014, the anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study in Nas. She had spent years listening to the Jew-Hawansi people of the Kalahari, recording what they talked about by day versus by firelight. The difference was sharp. Daytime talk was practical. Complaints, plans, arguments over who did what. But at night, around the fire, the conversation transformed. It turned to stories. To distant people. To the dead. To myth and song and imagination. Roughly 80% of the long firelight conversations were stories. The daytime almost never reached that. The flame, it turns out, was not just where food got cooked. It was where culture got told. Spare time is the invention here. Not the fire, not even the food. The gap and the glowing circle where we finally sat still long enough to fill it. Because a day that no longer needs 6 hours of chewing is a day with room in it. Room to make a better tool. Room to paint a wall. Room to sit at that Chesham Cave hearth and tell a story to someone you love while the fire does the digesting for you. So think again about the ancestor by the river, jaw aching, tearing at a raw strip of meat as the gray light comes up. That was not a person being lazy or primitive. That was a person doing the single hardest job there is, staying alive. With nothing but teeth and time. Everything you associate with being human, art, invention, conversation, boredom, curiosity, the luxury of a free afternoon, grew in the space that cooking cleared. We did not think our way into big brains and then invent cooking. It looks like it may have run the other way around. We cooked. And the free time cooking made is what let us become the kind of animal that thinks about any of this at all. That is worth one honest question for the comments. Cooking handed our ancestors back roughly the equivalent of a second job's worth of hours, every single day. So, if someone gave you 4 unclaimed hours tomorrow, no strings, no screens, no obligations, what would you actually do with them? Be honest. Because here is the uncomfortable part. Ancient humans fought for centuries to win those hours, and a lot of modern life is quietly built to sell them right back to us, one notification at a time. They ached for the free afternoon. We tend to fill it and never notice it is there.